Hi, this is Dr. Wallace J. Nichols, and I'm really excited to share this next episode with you. I interviewed Dr. Paul Piff, who studies awe and wonder and how it connects us to our waters. You're really going to enjoy this conversation. Paul Piff, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Welcome to the Blue Mind workshop here in Santa Cruz on the Monterey Bay. I like to start these conversations with a pretty simple question, which is, what's your water? What's the water that it lights you up, or the water you first fell in love with or connected with, or that's part of your story?
I was born in Seattle, Washington, in this country, and when I was 4 years old, my family, my parents and my brother and I moved to Israel, and there I spent 15 years. And Israel is a small country, but it has all sorts of amazing things to go visit and explore. And one of the places that my family really kind of came upon very early on was this series of large mineral pools that were fed by these underground springs called Sachne, which is an Arab term for oasis. When I was 4, the idea of leaving the heat of my hometown of Haifa, Israel, and jumping into a crystal clear, deep, freshwater pool and exploring was just amazing. And so every time we went there, and we went there dozens and dozens of times over my time in Israel, and it became a place that to me signified our family coming together in this unified collective experience. For me, it signified playing with my brother and connecting in the water, building things underwater, exploring the natural world through the lens of water. And it also, I think early on, especially given what I've become really interested in as a scientist now, became this sort of symbolic representation of things that bring people from diverse backgrounds together.
Right.
And so there, Israel being an embodiment of conflict for many, many years, here was evidence of disparate groups of people, Arabs, Israelis, coming together, having fun together, meeting around this kind of hearth, if you will, of water, and gathering in a very unified and cooperative way. And so I think early on, you know, as a kid, you're not really thinking about that stuff, but it's teaching you about the role that these kinds of natural resources, like water, can play in collective and social life.
So it's really one of the best Blue Mind stories I've ever heard, and all of the elements of what we talk about and what we've been talking about through the 7 ages of water, you know, from beginning to end of life, and everything in between, the creativity and connection, peace of mind, growing empathy, learning about others, play, and so on. So you've taken on a task that has probably elicited a little bit of eyeball rolling along the way. When you say, I study the science of awe, rather like, you know, the science of happiness. And I think a lot of people think of our emotional lives as being the lighter parts of our existence, and they think of science as, you know, chemistry, physics. But this is one of the most fascinating things going on for our time, is the ability to study the science of emotion, to kind of look inside the black box of the human mind and better understand who we are, what really drives us. And your piece of this has focused on awe and wonder, among other things. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about how did you end up studying awe as a scientist?
And what does awe even mean?
Right. Well, let's start with that.
Yeah. I've always been really interested in what are the things that make us as people come together, be kind toward one another, to forego self-interest, to even for a moment put your mind in another person's shoes, or see the world through another person's eyes. Those are really complex psychological things. And you could say that that's one of the reasons that we as a species are so cooperative and so ultra-social, is our immense ability to do that, to come together as groups. And yet we see all of this evidence of violence and antagonism and people behaving in selfish and greedy ways. And so what is it that makes someone behave even in a short moment in a way that's compassionate and kind? And the second thing that I was really interested in for years is what are the kinds of things that make people feel like their lives are meaningful and purposeful? What are the kinds of experiences people have that give their own individual lives a sense of purpose, a sense that they're contributing to something bigger than they are, a sense that they're part of something bigger than they are? What is it that causes someone to feel connected to a larger purpose? So when I started grad school, we can rewind the clock. I won't date myself, but it was more than a decade ago. I went into a lab that studied emotional experience as a way of understanding the fundamental ways in which people experience the world, the idea being emotions are that compass. People experience the world through this emotional lens. And to understand people, you want to understand the emotions they experience. And when my graduate advisor asked me, okay, Paul, like what emotion do you want to study? And I didn't have an answer. I didn't know he was going to ask me that question. So the first word that came to mind, because I had just spent 6 months backpacking around Africa and taking in all sorts of natural wonder there on animal safaris, was that 3-letter word, awe. And when I said it, he immediately laughed. He said, okay, good luck. We've wanted to study awe for 20 years and we've never figured out a way. And you can imagine why. Awe, like any emotion, is hard to stick in a test tube. And I don't mean a literal test tube.
Yeah.
What is it that manufactures awe for people?
Yeah.
Awe, like any emotion, is a subjective experience. So I get why it would be hard to study. But the first study that I ran in graduate school was on a different question, and that is, I brought people in from all over the country and asked them to tell me stories. They would face the camera, and I'd ask them a series of questions. And one of the questions that I asked them, the last question that I asked them was, tell me about the most meaningful or most transformative experience of your life. So I've got 18-year-olds, I've got 35-year-olds, I've got 70-year-olds, and I've got 85-year-olds telling me stories. And then afterwards, I got all these stories, and I gave them to researchers and myself, and we went through and transcribed them, word for word, what were people talking about. And then we coded them for the emotional content. What are the emotions that people are talking about in these stories that made them feel like they were so meaningful and so purpose-driven? And the theme that emerged, whether it was seeing your grandchild graduate from college, witnessing the birth of a child, the first visit to a Grand Canyon, the theme that emerged were stories of awe. And that was the first insight that I had, that this thing that no one seems to be studying yet seems so significant and important to people's sense of meaning and transformation and transcendence in their own lives.
Yeah.
So that little finding just stuck with me. And 5 years later, I started to tinker with awe in a test tube.
So you had this insight that you wanted to study awe, but then just by listening to a large group of people from many backgrounds, you had that instinct confirmed that awe is a big part of people's lives. So give us a definition, a working definition of awe, because it is subjective and it is a word that we throw around, and particularly in the form known as awesome, we throw that word around. In the academic sense, there is a working definition of awe that you've got right there ready to go.
We've been working on one. So think of awe as this way of encompassing kind of a family of emotions that people use, like amazing, wonderful, or wonder, awe, wonder, amazing. It's not this little thing, it's part of a family. But awe is, when we define it psychologically, something that you experience, something you see, something you think about, that is so vast or complex. So it could be something really large, like the Pacific Ocean, like the Grand Canyon, like the granite cliffs of Yosemite. But it could also be something small, like patterns of light on water. Or it could be something conceptually vast, like an equation in science that inspires awe among scientists because of how many things and how many different phenomena it explains. But awe is the feeling that's triggered when you experience something so vast or complex that it makes you feel like you need to change your understanding of the world to make sense of that thing that you're experiencing. So the way that I describe that is, it's when you have an experience that you say, that blew my mind. What people are saying is, this thing scrambled my mind so much that I feel like I actually have to rearrange my understanding of the world to make sense of that thing that I'm experiencing. So it's those two things, that sense that it's vast and complex, coupled with feeling like you need to change around your understanding of the world to make sense of that thing you're experiencing.
Right. Makes sense. And sometimes it can be unfamiliar. There can be a novelty component, but that's not necessary in that definition. But oftentimes we get accustomed to that source of awe. It becomes less awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
Like think about the second part of the definition, the sense that you need to make sense of what it is that you're experiencing.
Right.
If you've become what we as psychologists would say habituated, if you've become used to the thing, well, it stays large, but now you've made sense of it. And if you've made sense of it, you're not going to get awe from it.
Right.
And that begs the question, or it underscores the question, well, what about people that continue to find awe in the same thing day in, day out?
Yeah.
And so we've gotten really interested in people that we call high in a disposition to awe. What is it that makes them able to find awe in the same kinds of experiences that they have on a regular, habitual basis? And there's some special qualities.
And it could also be that the experience has some qualities that, while it is a repetitive experience, there are changes to it that allow it to continue to kind of confound us and be surprising.
Yeah,
and,
I love that.
And so on both sides.
Absolutely.
This just occurred to me, and I'd never thought of this before. And in sharing the story, I may fall apart a little bit. But I was adopted, and as an adoptee, I was always in wonder about the ability of my parents to go from child-free on one day, and then the next day to call themselves parents, and to treat me as their own with unconditional love and an incredible amount of empathy for my entire life. And for both of them to do that at the same time in the same place. I always just wondered at that, just as part of the human capacity. And I remember I asked my dad about that, and I related to him I'm a scientist, so I ask these questions and I wonder about things. And he said the word awe. He said, when they handed you to us, and we finally got you home, and the door closed, and I realized this is my son, I was in awe. I haven't really thought about that moment in this way before, but I just thought I'd share that. But your work, looking at awe, you have found that awe shifts us, it changes us. It doesn't just scramble us and leave us scrambled.
Right.
It reorients us in often some very positive ways, very pro-social ways, as you say.
Yep. Or one of the insights is, if you track emotional experience all over the world, so for instance, I have collaborators who I work with who gather big data using emotional experience tools all over the globe. And awe is experienced on my campus in Southern California. It's experienced in Santa Cruz, but it's also experienced in Namibia or in Beijing. People all over the country seem to have this experience in a regular way. The question then is, if that's a human universal, maybe we evolved to have it. And if we evolved to have it, then did it provide us an adaptive advantage? Why would an emotion like awe, now it's clear why fear would have evolved, avoid. It's clear why disgust would have evolved, don't put that thing in your mouth. But why would something like awe have evolved? So if awe plays a functional adaptive role, what role is that? That's the question. And so then comes the first reason that got me interested in awe, which is what causes people to come together. And awe, we're learning, and we've run lots of different studies at this point, is a collective emotion. And what I mean by that is that when people experience awe, that experience of awe and wonder seems to shift their attention away from me toward we. It triggers a sense of connection to the things larger than you. It connects you to others, the natural environment, a bigger sense of purpose. It reminds you of the larger things that you are an important but smaller part of. And by doing that, by shifting attention away, right? So like when you're looking at the Pacific Ocean, it's amazing to take in. But what you're also taking in is the vastness and the complexity of this thing that exists well outside of you, has gone on well before you were here, will go on for a lot longer, and is so huge it's unfathomable. And that gives you a sense of scale, a sense of external scale, but also a sense of self scale. And by doing that, we find people are more kind, they become more empathetic. So you make someone feel awe. We do that in a few different ways. One example is we take them to a grove of towering eucalyptus trees. They spend 60 seconds looking up at those big trees. They're filled with awe, and all of a sudden, because of that, they become more kind. They're more likely to help someone else. They become more empathetic. We do studies in the lab where we might bring someone to feel awe by having them look at simple, really simple, just patterns of light on water. So film shot of the surface of water with light reflecting on it. That's it. And they do that for 60 seconds. 60 seconds. 5 seconds wouldn't be enough. 5 minutes would be too long. But at 60 seconds, you kind of quiet the mind, and people all of a sudden begin to take in this thing that maybe they've known about for a long time, but experience it in a new way. They experience awe. They report feeling less important, less preoccupied with themselves, more empathetic, more compassionate, more kind, and more likely to even give up money, for instance, from their own pockets to help someone else out, which suggests that awe has this important kind of collective role. Awe is an emotion that we evolved to have that connects us to our groups and the bigger world that surrounds us.
So in a very personal way, that emotion of awe could even compel us to take in a stranger's baby and care for it as our own.
Absolutely.
For an entire lifetime.
Absolutely.
That's a powerful emotion.
It's a powerful emotion.
Yeah. So we've talked about the various sources of awe in our lives. It may be music, it may be a political rally, could be architecture, could be things large and small. But nature is a very large universal source of awe, both historically and right now and in the lives of many people. And even within that broad category called nature, water holds its own. You've mentioned various kinds of water, from the Pacific Ocean to light reflecting off of the surface of water. I know your team has done research in river environments and forests, but we've been a little obsessed with water in our conversations, and the time we spent together in Cornwall with the musician Alexi Murdoch. And he shared his experiences of awe that he turned into music. There's something about water, and not to get into a water green space versus blue space or ocean versus mountains competition, but water has a few extras to it that allow it to be a source of awe. So your own research, I remember one of our first conversations. You have all this research, but hadn't been sort of pushed to look at water specifically. And I remember you saying when you looked at your own data, there is a water signal in there that you said, wow, that's cool and that's real and that's significant, and let's maybe package that up and connect those dots.
Good. One of the first things that you ask or that one would ask is, what are the kinds of things that bring awe about? And you just said very eloquently that so much of awe, or the awe that people experience, is awe in nature. And that's true. And you can measure that scientifically. And we have tried to. And it seems like around 75 to 80% of the times when people experience awe is in the natural environment.
Wow.
So when they're out in nature. Now that leaves 20% for experiences elsewhere that are really important, like seeing a child being handed to you that's yours to take care of for the first time. But from what people report, far larger percentage is stuff that you do and stuff that you see in the natural world. And when we've gone through and kind of coded what are the kinds of nature or natural environments that inspire awe in people, far more than 50% of those. So the vast majority of people's natural or experiences in nature that inspire awe are ones that incorporate themes of water. And I think one of the reasons for that is water is interactive. Water is a big part of nature, right? So when you go to a natural environment, one of the draws is there going to be water there? At least that's the case for me, and it seems millions of other people. But awe is something people search out, and water is a big part of how people find it.
There's meaning in the research that you've done into, sort of like these concentric circles. So you've got awe from nature, and you've got awe from water, this big chunk. Therefore, this awe switches us from a me to a we perspective, and then that begs the question, so what? What are we going to do about it? One of the things I think is, we better take care of the water, because I've been to bodies of water that inspired no awe because they're sad and they're dead and they've been diminished in some way. And I've been to bodies of water that are endless sources of awe.
Right.
And so if awe is one of the ways we create empathy and we connect, and water is a huge source of that, then that sort of, suggests that we better keep working hard to keep these awe factories running, right?
Yeah. One of the things I would say, and I think you absolutely just said it really well, is that what we've been learning about awe is that it plays this really important role, and it has all sorts of benefits for us as individuals, for us in relationships. So romantic relationships, couples that experience awe last longer, to the extent that they can experience awe together. And it also has benefits for groups and collectives and society in the world. That's the argument.
Right.
And the conclusion from that I would draw is that it seems vitally important, particularly in society today, where all of these different data that we're gathering suggests that we're looking at a decline in awe. There's actually an awe deficit in society these days. It becomes paramount to seek out those experiences of awe, to attune to them, attend to them, seek them out, attend to them, and cherish and protect those things that bring them about. Right. And if water has played such a vital role in our ability, in our tendency to experience awe, well then, absolutely, it's our duty to do what we can to protect it.
That brings up a sort of a concerning question. What is an awe-free life like? What are the ramifications of an awe-free community or society? That may be something that you could study, or you hinted at that. So there is a decline in this experience of awe, partly related to the decline in time spent in nature, I imagine. I've talked to a lot of kids about this topic, young people, and none of them have ever said they've experienced awe on their smartphone, or none of them have said an app gives them really much awe. It's generally when the screens are put down. Not to say that there are not films that inspire awe and that that art can be delivered on screens, but generally the app culture is entertaining. But it doesn't quite reach that level of scrambling the way you think about yourself in the world.
Absolutely.
So an awe-free existence, what are the implications of that if we carry that forward?
It sounds terrible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can kind of visualize what that life and community might look like. You mentioned, for instance, that people might be spending less time outdoors. The latest data is that the majority of adults in the U.S. spend fewer than 5 hours a week outside. And their kids spend 3 times as much interacting with technology, their iPhones and computers, 3 times as much than they do playing outside. So maybe there's reason to think that there's a decline in awe. So an awe deficit means you're spending a lot of time working. You're not spending a lot of time playing. Your health suffers. Why does your health suffer? Because you're not having this rich tapestry of experiences that contribute to your well-being, to your sense of meaning and purpose. You're kind of just working in the trenches. You're, in neighborhoods and communities that are awe-deprived, health suffers, well-being suffers, cooperation suffers, crime rates go up. I mean, you can kind of track this with certain things that we see happen in neighborhoods and in communities. I mean, I think one of the questions is not only what are the implications of an awe-free life, and those implications are kind of devastating, just like a joy-free life, because so much of joy are those things that inspire and get us to feel wonder and get us to feel amazed about the world around us, that make us curious to explore, right? What's an exploration-free life?
Right.
Why do kids experience so much awe? You could say evolutionarily, right? This term, childlike wonder, you've heard that?
Sure.
Right, that sense of childlike wonder. What does that mean? Well, I think what it means is that kids experience a lot of awe. And you could say that the adaptive function of that, the reason why that is because it's really important for kids to go out and explore the world.
Right, and learn.
And awe makes people want to do that. It makes them more curious, makes them more open to novel people, novel experiences, want to learn. And so an awe-free life is almost a learning-free existence where you're not acquiring new information, you're not seeking out new experiences, you're not tackling the daunting challenges that make your life meaningful and purposeful. That sounds really confining, really restrictive.
Yeah. So a blue mind life, living a waterful life, seems exquisitely adapted to a planet that's mostly water. That awe that we get from the water that inspires us, that creates joy, that inspires us to explore, to learn, to connect with each other, builds our empathy, provokes collaboration, wonder, creativity, enhances romance. They ought to be accessible to as many people as possible. I think that's probably really the goal. Where does this lead? It leads to a real rigorous conversation about access to awe and how we increase it rather than keep this trajectory, this downward trajectory that we're on. We need awe for all, I guess.
Awe for all.
Awe
I
for
like
all,
that.
right?
Yeah.
If we together right now, if we're just dreaming up a brand new research project related to this conversation and water, let's do it. Let's just dream one up right now.
Let's do it. What's your idea?
Well, I've talked to you about this. Yeah, nicely done. I've actually talked to you a little bit about this. What about people who have never seen the ocean? What might be done if we found a group of people of various ages who have grown up and have not experienced an actual vast ocean? That just sounds super cool to do, just
Super
on the
cool.
face of it. But from a research perspective, what would that look like? What might we learn from people who have experienced awe, but perhaps have never experienced that kind of awe?
Yeah. Well, that'd be an incredible study for a few reasons. I think really transcendent experiences of awe are hard to capture because they're so rare. How many times do you get to, as a scientist, understand what it's like to experience something this vast and complex and amazing as the ocean for the first time? And one of the things I would be really interested in is, in a group like that, for example, the ability to look at, measure the benefits of that kind of experience and how it carries with them, how it's sustained. So when they see that ocean for the first time, how do their bodies respond? How do their levels of stress change? Does cortisol shift? Does it go down? How long does that last when they get back home? Do they tell other people about it? You know, think about like what in the 18th century, the culture of going out and exploring and people going out, for instance, in search of the Arctic and sending back telegrams around what they were finding, and you have whole communities gathering around the unknown. I like the idea of the ability to look at not only how awe affects the individuals who go see the ocean, but also when they return to this community, how it kind of ripples out and cascades across that whole collective. The stories they tell. What do people extract from that and carry with it and carry from it? And how does that affect them? So it's just an amazing ability, I think, or an amazing opportunity to study this really kind of pivotal experience that someone might have toward water for the first time, and how that experience carries with them in their own life, but also in the lives of the people that they're connected to.
Yeah, super cool. I think that study needs to happen.
Yeah, I think we should do it.
And it reminds me that there are smaller experiences of awe that are happening every day. They're happening right now at the water's edge. And the people who have spent the time by the water, they're going home tonight. They might be a little more empathetic, a little more kind, a little more calm. And the people who didn't have that experience will get some of the benefits, some of that sort of, that stoke will rub off.
Absolutely.
And those people who get a little bit of the benefit will pass it on, maybe to a lesser degree, to the people that they see next. And so it isn't always about everybody going and watching the sunset every day. It's about, some people doing it and bringing it back, and it sort of ripples through the community as you described.
Cascades. Yep.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd add is that a lot of people, and we didn't really get to touch on this, but I think it's important, or it could be an important point. A lot of people think of awe as something you need to make time for, like it's a recreational thing. Maybe if I've got time, I'll go to the Grand Canyon this summer. So it's something you've got to like make time for, and it's not really all that important. And that's a misconception. So we've just run a bunch of studies that showcase this, but the simple lesson of all these studies is that if you, Jay, were to leave your house, and my task to you was to go on an awe walk for just 2 minutes, the sole purpose of which is to find something that for you inspires awe. That's it. 2 minutes. Just walking around. Walking around my neighborhood? What do you mean? I walk around my neighborhood all the time. What am I going to do that's going to make me experience awe? People find it in all sorts of ways. And they write about it, for instance, in our studies. And one person figured out that if you walk around with a blank sheet of paper under a tree and you see the shadows of light and dark play out across that sheet of paper, filled that person with goosebumps, which is a feature of awe. Another person figured out that if you go and you just look at water's surface and the ripples and look at it for just a little bit of time, it's almost transcendent in its beauty and its complexity. So you can just take a little bit of time out of your day, go out in search of awe, and if you experience it, you're going to have all of these positive benefits as a result. Not just because of a 2-minute experience, but if you sustain it, right? Just like people make a tradition of going to the gym or taking a walk, build a little more time in your day to have that kind of experience.
The lesson here is find awe in water or otherwise frequently, and take a friend with you.
Take a friend with you.
Right. Paul, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Amazing. Love it. Yeah. I really enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Piff and how he explains that water is the #1 source of awe and wonder in our lives. We all need more Blue Mind in our lives, so please share what we're doing here with everybody you know. And I'm really looking forward to sharing the next episode with you.